Well, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whatever it might be, wherever you might be watching from. Welcome to a Photo Joseph live show. Today we are diving into HDR on YouTube. This is going to be a lot. This is going to be a lot packed into an hour. I actually did this presentation earlier today for a video maker magazine, cinema, like live kind of, nobody can do trade shows quite really yet. So one of those online live trade shows. And I thought, I'm going to deliver the same presentation for you guys. Now there, I had a 55-minute window. Here, it's my own time, so I might go a little bit longer. We'll see how things go. Kind of depends on how many questions you guys ask. But yeah, I think this is going to be a lot of fun. There's so much information to get into on here. But first, of course, let's just see who's in the chat. Say hello in the chat room for me. Let's just see what we've got going on here. Let's bring up the first chatter of the day, who is, there we go, Elite Surf Coaching from Bali. Oh, that sounds kind of cool. It just sounds like going to Bali just sounds so good. I think I don't surf, but maybe I should just go and learn how, because that sounds pretty good to me. Bugs Bob World in Southern California. Always good to see you, my friend. Good to see you here. We've got MT Sturang. Let's see if I can get this right. Sturang. I'm going to go with Sturang. I think that's probably halfway almost there. In Hanover, Germany at 6 a.m. Well, you're up early. Thank you very much. I do appreciate that. Look at that, Mr. iPhone Doe in the house. Thank you, my brother. Appreciate you being here today. Hopefully I can teach you something. And like I said in the chat, I'll teach you HDR. You teach me how to do B-roll. Man, if you guys haven't seen his videos, he is the king of the B-roll. The opening B-roll shots are just like ridiculous. I mean, it just makes all the rest of us go, okay, I'm done with YouTube and I'm out. Yeah, it's kind of like that. If you don't know his stuff, watch his stuff. All right, Chris in Chicago. Good to see you again, my friend. Always awesome. Let's see, we've got Keith Sklauer in San Francisco. There you go. 9 o'clock in the evening. Well, that's the same time as it is for me. And let's see here. Lee is here. Awesome. Oh, good. Okay, so Lee, you wanted to watch this one earlier today, but couldn't. I understand completely. I understand. You are not on this side of the planet, are you? We got Nashville in the house. We got all kinds of people here. This is just fantastic. All right. Well, here's how this is going to go. I have an agenda. I'm going to show you the agenda. I want you guys to throw out your questions at any time. What I'll do is I will check for new questions between each section so that I can kind of get through that section, and then I'll jump down and see if there's any questions for that. If you have questions that are related to a section that isn't up yet, that hasn't happened yet, save those until I get there for me, as much as you can at least, so that I can try to answer the questions that are relevant to the section that was just happening. Obviously, it's just no hard, fast rules here, but it just does help to go that route. So with all that said, let's get this thing going, shall we? Let's just get started with the slides. Here we go. So this class, this seminar, this thing is called Getting Started with HDR for YouTube. Now, this is specifically about YouTube. However, the only part that is unique to YouTube is actually the very, very end. So everything else, pardon me, everything else is really just about HDR content delivery. Now, we are also going to be working in Final Cut because that's where I work. Obviously, we're going to be seeing specific things for Final Cut here. However, if you are not using Final Cut, if you're using Premiere or Resolve, then you'll just need to take some of that same information and figure out how it translates into that app. I just don't know those apps well enough, but that's just kind of how that goes. So that's that basic agenda. Also, there is a companion website that is already up for this. It is photojoseph.com/HDR. That will be the future home of lots and lots and lots of HDR goodness. But at the moment, what you'll find there, and you can go there right now if you want, what you'll find there is all of the notes that I'm about to put up on screen. You'll find them all there. So if there's anything that you want to look at again, it will all be there. Along with a bunch of links that you're going to need, and even some code, some text that you're going to want to grab and copy and save into your computer. So all of that is on that page, so do be sure to check that out. All right, here's the agenda. We will be going first talking about hardware, what hardware is needed to do HDR, because HDR does require some specific hardware, at least for monitoring, and of course for shooting to some degree. You're going to need specific hardware for that. We're going to talk about shooting, how you set up your camera for HDR. And anybody who's watching this who doesn't know me already, I am a Panasonic LUMIX ambassador, so I will be talking specifically about how to set this up with the Panasonic cameras. However, of course, anything that meets these requirements will work as well. Then we're going to talk about editing, and as I mentioned before, we're going to be editing in Final Cut, so you will see the Final Cut workflow. But again, if you're not a Final Cut editor, you can take this information, translate that to your NLE of choice. We'll talk about encoding, and this is the process of encoding the video into a 10-bit format that is ready for upload to YouTube. But at that point, you're not really done yet, because you also want to create an HDR to SDR LUT. You want to have a custom HDR to SDR LUT. We'll talk about this. We'll talk about why, and obviously I'm going to show you how. And then we'll talk about how to embed that LUT. And that's the final step of this process before you can upload your file to the YouTubes. So that is the agenda. We're going to start by talking about the hardware, what you need on here. Let me just take a quick look though down at the questions and see if there's anything that we want to get on there first. Before we go in, and let's just see. Let's see here. Ooh, someone said my feed is cutting off. Uh-oh, working fine now. Okay, good. Feed was cutting out, but it's working fine now. People are saying, so that's good. All right, good. Okay, excellent. And MT Stirring did not know iPhone though. Oops, I guess I probably should bring up the actual chat there. There we go. MT Stirring did not know iPhone though, but now does. So excellent. Look at that. Look at that. Getting you a sub right there. Like you need it. All right, let's go. Let's get back into it now. Okay, so starting with hardware. This is, we're gonna start with the camera, what cameras you need. And as I said, obviously as a Panasonic LUMIX guy, I'm gonna talk about those cameras. You need a camera that is capable of shooting log. Now, I know that there is another HDR format. We're gonna talk about that a little bit as well. And I'm gonna tell you why you probably don't really wanna shoot there if you can avoid it. But log is where you wanna be to get the true HDR experience. And all of these LUMIX cameras shoot log. So if you're shooting in the full frame, you got your S1H, your S5, your S1, and then on the Micro Four Thirds, your BGH1, GH5 Mark II, the GH5, the GH5S, and the G9 all do log. So in Panasonic, it is V-Log, that's the Vericam log. On the Micro Four Thirds cameras, it's V-Log L, which is kind of a light version of log, although the difference is marginal, especially on the newer Micro Four Thirds cameras. It is just a little bit less dynamic range than you get on the bigger ones, but it is largely the same flavor of log that you get on the bigger cameras. So that's the first thing. You need a camera that can shoot log. We're going to talk about how to set this up as well. You will also need a way to monitor an HDR. Now, technically, you don't have to. I mean, you could monitor on an SDR screen, but it's kind of like editing in the dark. I mean, it's just you don't. You want some type of an HDR screen. Now, at the higher end of what you can get to have kind of the most luxurious experience would be the Apple Pro XDR display or Pro Display XDR. Expensive, but awesome. Now, I say expensive, and it is expensive for a monitor. Just like if you're just thinking about your computer monitor, it's expensive. If you're thinking about an HDR monitor though, it really isn't, because the big pro HDR monitors that I'm not even going to include on this list cost upwards of $40,000 and $50,000. So this is actually just not that bad, but we can actually do a lot cheaper than this. So this is kind of the convenient luxury, and my God, you get a 32-inch HDR display on your desk, which is marvelous. Now the price range, it's kind of a joke because it starts at $5,000, but that's useless because you really don't want the shiny one. You really want the one with the nano texture on it, because the lack of glare on this screen is phenomenal. I have one. I work on one. It was a expense to stomach, but my God, the thing is glorious. So that's $1,000 extra. And then you need a stand to put it on because it doesn't come with a stand. Let's just not talk about Apple's marketing on this. So that brings it up to $7,000. So it's, again, ridiculously a lot of money for a monitor, but for HDR, it's really not that bad. Now, that said, if you step away from that, your iMac Pro, your MacBook Pro, current kind of late model of these Mac, even the M1 MacBook Air, have high nit value screens. Now, to do HDR, you are grading to a 1000 nit value. And we'll talk about this when we get into the editing part of it. You're grading to a 1000 nit target. Your screen ideally is 1000 nits or better. So the XDR display goes up to 1600 nits. Some of these other Macs though have high nit. They're just not that high. They're like 600 nit. I think one might be 800. I think the MacBook Pros are like 400 or 500. It's not ideal, but it's better than just a total standard display. And you can kind of get away with it. You turn on tone mapping, which is going to be on automatically in Final Cut Pro. And on a high-ish nit Mac screen, it'll look pretty good. And you can kind of get away without doing a custom or having a dedicated HDR monitor, although obviously it's better if you do. Now, I mentioned the iPhone 10 and above, and then the iPad Pro in parentheses there, because you can't use them as grading monitors while you're editing, but it is a great way to look at the work that you've done afterwards and preview it on a true HDR screen before you upload it. Now, the latest iPad Pro has the XDR screen in it, the same type of display that's in the Pro Display XDR. I don't have one of these yet. As far as I know, there is no way to use it as a monitor for Final Cut. You can set it up as an AirPlay second desktop, but I don't believe, and I don't have one, so I haven't been able to test this, but I don't believe that the HDR metadata gets sent over with it, meaning that it would not truly display as an HDR image on that screen as a wireless second screen off of Final Cut. If it did, or if it does, or if they add that capability, that's crazy awesome, because you have a $1,000 screen that is true HDR that you could connect to your iPad, to your what do you call it, a MacBook Pro or MacBook Air even, and have a HDR screen next to it. I mean, that would be like insane. So I don't know if they're doing it. I don't know if they're considering it. I don't know if it's technically possible, but my God, if they do, well, that'd be a game changer right there for the cost of HDR. Okay, so that is option 1.1 and so on. And then you get into truly dedicated HDR displays. So Atomos makes a pair of these, the Neon 17-inch and the Neon 24-inch. You see the prices on your screen there, $3,500 and $6,500. Not cheap. Compare that to the 32-inch XDR display. But these are professional HDR monitors that have a lot of broadcast type features in them, scopes built in and so on. They do recording. If you're going to take it in the field, think of it like if you're used to the Ninja 5, the little Ninja, think of it like a 24-inch 4K Ninja 5 that you can put on set, take a feed directly from the camera into, even record into it, take your log feed and convert it to 2020 PQ for HDR and actually monitor an HDR on set. It's incredible for that sort of thing. So that's where it becomes, more worth it. But if you are just getting it for monitoring on your desk, then you're going to put that kind of money in, you might really want to consider the XDR. Now, I have a 17-inch Atomos Neon on my desk right now. This is on loan to me from Atomos. It's kind of awesome. It's pretty beautiful. It is, however, only HD. Interesting point. The 17-inch is only HD. The 24-inch is true to 4K. But at 17, you can't really tell. But it's just something to know if you're putting that kind of money into it. It's not actually a 4K display. So those are options. We're going to talk in a bit about how to get those onto your connected to your computer, because that's an important part of this as well. And then on the cheaper side of things, you can actually buy a consumer off the shelf, walk into Best Buy, walk into Costco, and buy an LG OLED TV. The C10 is the current model that you would want to go for, and those come in sizes from 42-inch, 48, 42-inch, something like that, up to like 75, huge. They're glorious, they're amazing looking, and this will give you a really big HDR image to grade on. Not a professional screen, but it's a consumer screen, and this is what people will see your content on at home. So now, to be fair, I do a lot of HDR work, so I have kind of a ridiculous HDR setup. I do have an XDR screen that I do my work on. I have the Neon right now that is a grading monitor that's connected. I also have an LG TV all connected at once, so that when I'm grading, I can look back and forth and I can see how the image is going to look across these different screens. So, there's always going to be subtle differences there. So, if you're going crazy about it, this is a way to go crazy about it. And that's kind of how that comes together. Okay, next let's talk about how these things actually connect to your computer, how they interface to your computer, because this is another big part of it. So you have to use a proper HDR interface to connect. Now, I don't have it listed on here, but your Mac, depending on the model, you might actually be able to hook up a TV, if it's an HDMI set, like an LG TV, directly from your Mac. And you don't need anything other than plugging it in as an HDR display, plugging it in as an HDMI display, and then enabling HDR in the system preferences. So that is actually an option. It does pull resources off your graphics card. It is not as good as having it on a dedicated interface, but that is an option. But let's get into the actual interface options. So the cheapest one that you can get right now is the Blackmagic Ultra Studio Monitor 3G. It's high def only. This is one of these little tiny guys. So they're itty bitty little boxes. Thunderbolt, and then this has HDMI and SDI out. Actually, you know what? I realized I have one so I could test it, and I haven't actually tested it yet. I don't know if they run both the HDMI and the SDI simultaneously, or if it switches. I don't actually know. Anyway, that will actually give you an HDR image out. It carries the metadata, the HDR metadata flag from your system out to your HDR monitor and makes it display in HDR. It is HD only though. So if you're pairing it with that 17-inch Atomos, then great. There's a cheap way to get into that. If you're going to plug it into an HDR TV, like an LG TV, that will work, but you're only going to get an HD signal, not a true 4K signal. So that's something to know. But that is kind of the cheapest way to get into it. Next you have, and this isn't in order of price, just kind of products are grouped together. Anyway, the next you have, next option is the Blackmagic Ultra Studio 4K Mini. Now this is a Thunderbolt interface. This does a lot more than doing just an HDR, being an HDR monitoring device, but it does that as well as a bunch of other things. I actually use one in this whole broadcast because it has dual SDI out. And so I use it to send graphics with transparency from my graphics software package into my ATEM. So kind of, it's a big way of using it, but that is a way that will also give you your HDR. If you are using a Mac Pro, if you happen to have a Mac Pro Tower, then you can buy the $195 Blackmagic DeckLink Mini Monitor 4K. So it's a PCIe card. This will give you both HDMI and SDI out like the little box, but it's 4K. And I do know that they both run simultaneously because that's actually what I use on my Mac Pro. So that is a great option as well. So it's a very inexpensive option. If you've already spent the $10,000 on a Mac Pro, you can get that on there. So that's a pretty sweet way to go. And so I have on mine, the SDI is connected into my my Atomos Neon, and the HDMI is plugged into my LG TV. So it's a great way to do it. Then there's two other products from Aja. I have not tested these, but by specs, they do what they're supposed to do for this. The Aja TTAP Pro is $795 and the IO 4K Plus is $24.95. Now that TTAP Pro actually becomes the cheapest Thunderbolt 4K HDR monitoring solution that I know of. There might be other ones out there. Lee out in the chat right now, if you know of any other options that people should consider, by all means, please drop them into the chat. Don't include a link because then the system will block it from you. But if you know of any others, by all means, drop them in. Drop the name of them in there and people can go check those out. So those are your interface options. Those are at least the most common ones and the ones that I know of. So that's how that works. All right, let's take a break from the chit chat here and let's jump over to the chat and see if there's anything else going on here. Lee says it must be 10-bit and log. Yes, we are going to actually get into that. So yes, it does. But I think any camera that shoots log will also shoot 10-bit. I can't imagine a camera that shoots log that doesn't do 10-bit. Anyway, we're going to come to this. Keith, what about monitoring on an HDR capable TV? So we just talked about that. And I've not used the Sony, but the LG really, you watch reviews about these and the LGs always come out on top. I'm no TV expert. Obviously there's people out there who spend their lives reviewing TVs on various YouTube channels. I think if you talk to anybody in the industry, anybody who does color grading for a living, HDR work for a living, they will tell you that the LGs are the way to go. If you're going to buy a consumer set, get an LG. They are amazing. They rock. Now, Lee is pointing out that they're not 1,000 nits, so they won't be ideal for grading. Like the LG that I have is, I think, 750 nits, so it is very bright. It does not hit that full 1,000 nit value. But I will also point out that there's not that much that you push to 1,000 nits. Like you really can't push your whole grade to 1,000 nits or you're going to blind your audience. And these TVs are designed to roll off that 1,000 nit highlights down to their capability, whatever that might be, and to make it look really good. Which is why I kind of go back to what I was saying earlier about it's a really good idea to be able to look at it on multiple screens and see how it's going to look for the end result. See what it's going to look like on the consumer's television set. Chris W, no, that list does not include the S1R. The S1R does not shoot log, sorry to say. And let's see here. Lee saying loads of Sony cameras shoot log. Sony would put log in anything, and I mean anything. So maybe that means that they are log with 8-bit, which would be kind of useless. Honestly, very useless. And Lee says that pretty much covers it. So I guess that's the interface list that he's talking to there. Okay, cool. So that is that part of it. I just realized that I filled my water and I didn't bring it. Just give me, I'll be right back. I gotta get my water. There's way too much talking happening today to not have my water here. All right, let's go back to the slides and go to the next slide, which is shooting. So now we're talking about how to set up the camera for shooting in HDR. The first thing, as I mentioned earlier, and as Lee pointed out as well, it not only has to be log, it has to be 10-bit log. Now, just to kind of reiterate on this point, if you only have 8 bits of data, you are going to get banding in your HDR and it is going to look awful, so don't do it. You need 10-bit. And you need log. You really, really do need log. Now, I know some people out there are going to say, but what about HLG? My camera shoots HLG and that's HDR. Think of HLG as the JPEG of HDR. HLG is a finished format. Just like a JPEG is a finished format that, yes, you can do a little exposure work to it, but at the end of the day, what you get out of the camera as a JPEG might look amazing, but you better get it right in camera. Very, very little margin for error there. Whereas when you shoot RAW in camera, you can go all over the place and do anything you want with your file and make it look amazing. It's kind of the same here when shooting log versus shooting HLG. If you're shooting HLG, the SDR, the HDR that you're getting out of the camera is essentially fixed. Yes, you can do some small adjustments to it, but you're not going to do any dramatic changes to it. You're not going to recover blown highlights. You're not going to do a total custom look on it. It's just, it is what it is. It's what you get out of the camera. The cool thing about HLG is HLG, which stands for hybrid log gamma. Hybrid log gamma, the hybrid part of that means that the file is both HDR and SDR simultaneously. I mean, sort of. It's an HDR file with a logarithmic curve, a log curve in it that brings it back into SDR range. And this is built into the file. And the whole point of this is that you can take the exact same image, show it on an HDR or an SDR display, and it looks fine on either one. It's actually meant for broadcast. If you are broadcasting in HDR, you can't expect that your whole audience is going to have an HDR display. So you broadcast in HLG, and then anything that's being broadcast will automatically get ramped down into SDR as well on an SDR display. So if you're watching HDR sports, for example, Super Bowl or something that's being broadcast in HDR, then that is going to be an HLG image that can be viewed on both SDR and HDR displays. So HLG is nice, but it's not really where you want to go for HDR. Codecs. What codecs can you shoot in? So this is your options of shooting internally, which can be H.264 or HEVC. Either one, if your camera will support it for that 10-bit log, will work fine. That, if it's shooting HEVC, that kind of comes down to whether your system can handle editing that or not. But either one of those work. Now, those are going to be kind of your minimum, your lower bitrate minimum, and those might be 200, 300, 400 megabit bit rates, depending on your camera. But this is the bare minimum. The next step up would be to shoot ProRes, not ProRes RAW. This is just straight ProRes 422, because that's going to give you about an 800 megabit stream, which is going to be a much more data, much more information in the file, so that when you're doing your pushing and pulling of your HDR grid, you just have more data to work with. It's not required, but it will, at the end of the day, give you a better image. You could also shoot RAW, but you don't have to. And I really put this on here to drive the point home that I think a lot of people think, oh, I can't do HDR, I can't shoot RAW. You don't have to shoot RAW to do HDR. You certainly can go to HDR from RAW, by all means. You will have additional options, additional advantages to grading your file than you would get shooting ProRes or some internal codec. But it's also additional work because, for example, RAW does not have denoising applied in the camera. You actually have to denoise in post, which is time intensive, and your computer will crunch on that for a long time. It's kind of required. If you're shooting really low ISO in RAW, then you probably don't have to, but you get up into 800 or something or higher, you're gonna have to start denoising, and that takes a lot of power. So shooting RAW is should never be the default option. You really should only shoot RAW if you really, really need it. So just kind of throwing that out there. Okay, next is the demo. So let me just show you in the camera how we set this up. So I am using here, if I get my cables untangled, I've got here a GH5 Mark II, and I'm going to, let's get this fired up, flip this on, pull up the menu, there it is. And let me just show you how you would set this up for shooting HDR. So first thing you're going to need is to set a photo style of log. And in these Lumix cameras, it's a Vlog or Vlog L. And so whatever profile you have in here, you're just going to scroll through and find that Vlog or log profile. So log is, again, required. So that's the first thing that has to be done. The second one is to shoot in a 10-bit format. So on the GH5 Mark II, you have a kind of ridiculous array of options, 6 pages of options you can shoot with. If you hit that button that says display filtering, it will allow you to filter by a variety of things. If I go to codec, I can say show me only 10-bit options. So you have 3 different 10-bit options. The 10 there is 10-bit. 420, 422, and 422 iframe and 422 long up. Do 422. It's just going to give you the better quality. And you know, the difference between long op and iframe is more about editing. There is going to be a slight quality difference, but probably not really going to be noticeable for most people. But the editing difference will be. So the iframe files will be bigger files, but they will be easier to edit, meaning your computer won't choke as much on them. So I personally, if I'm going to shoot internally, I always want to go 422 10-bit all intra, which is what I is. So you do that, and then you say display OK, and that filters by it. And now I can see the different options that I have. So again, this is the GH5 Mark II. I can shoot 4K anamorphic, 30p. There's a few different 4K anamorphic, cinema 4K options, straight 4K, and even just straight up HD. You can shoot just 1920 by 1080. There's nothing stopping you from delivering HDR in 1080p. It's just, you kind of like, if you're going that far, then you may as well shoot 4K. But you can do it. It's possible. So that's it. You choose the format that you want to shoot in, and off you go. So that's really all there is for the camera setup. 10-bit log. That's it. Once you do that, you're good to go. Cool. Okay. Let's jump back over to the comments again before we move to the next section and see what there is. Lee is adding into the HLG. That's awesome that Lee is here because Lee knows probably is more about HDR than I'm going to forget in my whole life. Is that where he's going to forget more about HDR than I will ever, you know what I mean. It's a compliment, not an insult, Lee. Just take it. HLG originally designed, developed by BBC and the NHK. That's right. NHK is a Japanese broadcast system. Broadcast network. The beauty is that you could deliver an HLG and not have to grade, but it's like HDR LUT. There you go. There you go. Couldn't have said it better myself. For Sony shooters on the alpha cameras, your profile for log would normally be PP7, PP9. Either S-Log 2 or 3 on most cameras. PP10 is HLG. Okay. Oh, good to know. Cool. Yeah, I don't know these cameras, so I don't know. Excellent. Thank you, Lee. All right. That's it for questions or comments. So superb. We're going to move on by going back to the slides and moving on to the next step. All right, next step is editing. This will be, of course, again, featuring the Final Cut Pro. So what do you need to do to edit HDR? First thing you have to do is you have to create a wide gamut library. I'm going to show you all of this, so don't worry, we're going to go through all of it. You have to create a wide gamut library. When you create your library, by default, it is standard dynamic range, but you can change it into wide gamut for HDR. And once you've done that, you can actually do SDR out of an HDR library, but you can't do HDR out of an SDR library. So just something to think about. You could actually do all your projects in HDR libraries if you wanted to. I tend to keep them separate, but whatever, you can do that. So you have to create a wide gamut library. Your project has to be set to Rec 2020 PQ. Again, we are talking specifically about YouTube delivery. There might be reasons to do other formats. We'll talk about it a little bit when it comes up, but this is what you want to set it to, Rec 2020 PQ. We'll be looking at this. And then your footage that comes in, your log footage, needs to, of course, be graded for HDR. So there's a variety of ways that you can go about doing this. And I'm going to show you the way that I do it, which is the first one on there, a color space override to PQ. This is the easiest way that I've found to do this in Final Cut. You just take your log footage in, you set a color space override, and suddenly everything's in HDR, and it looks like normal colors. Your colors don't look like log. It's expanded out to a normal looking color space, which is marvelous. So you just one click and everything's done. Now you can continue to grade it. You can adjust your exposure. You can pull your highlights and shadows. You can color grade it all you want, give it a look and so on. But what you get out of that is kind of like the equivalent of taking a log file and dropping a Rec 709 LUT on it. It just looks good. It just looks normal. That's what happens. It just looks normal. You can also use a LUT. So depending on your camera, the built-in LUT might work in HDR. It might not. You can buy third-party LUTs, but I have not found very many third-party LUTs that are HDR compliant. So if you have a bunch of LUTs that you love, they may or may not work, and odds are more to may not work in HDR. You can do LUT conversion, but generally you want one that's actually designed for it. So anyway, so something to think about. And then you can do a manual grade. You can start from log and do a full manual grade into HDR. But it's kind of funny for Final Cut users, you know that there's like the highlight slider, for example. You drag it up or down to adjust the highlights. Well, to get from log into actual highlight space that you want to be in for HDR, you got to drag that thing way beyond its endpoint. It's almost comical, and it's kind of hard to adjust at that point. So you would be better off dropping it into a color space override or putting a LUT on it and then starting from there. It's just one of those things. All right, let's have a demo. Let's take a look at Final Cut. So let me exit out of here. And make sure I set this up properly. Yes, I did. And here is Final Cut. So Final Cut, no library created yet. We are starting completely from scratch. I'll go to New Library. And I'm just going to call this Demo and probably Demo 2 because I probably already have one called Demo. Put this in my Movies folder. Obviously, put it wherever you want. And when you first create it, notice that you did not get a choice to choose the color space. So by default, it just gets made as an SDR color space. You have to convert it after you've created the library, which is honestly a little bit tedious, but there you go. So with the library selected, you go over here to the right under the properties, you see library properties, it's set to standard, you click on modify, and this is where you change it from standard to wide gamut HDR. Now I can do things in HDR, yay. Okay, now I'm going to add a clip into this. I'll import a clip that is on my desktop. Here's the one. So this is a clip that was shot for one of my videos. This is one I did on the 3D focus system on the, what do you call that thing? The Ronin. And this is how I do my videos, right? I shoot everything in log so that I can go to HDR if I want to. So there's the log clip. We're just going to go ahead and import that in. And here it's still going to look like log in the timeline, log in the browser here. I'm going to create a new project. And this new project, you can actually just leave it in automatic. Everything will work just fine. But I'm going to go custom just so I can show you how to set this up, how it will get set up. Obviously, this is 4K. Clearly, you're setting your resolution and frame rate to whatever you're shooting in. Rendering. Here's an interesting thing. So rendering by default is going to go to ProRes 422, and ProRes 422 is fine for this. Now, people might tell you, you might read on the interwebs that, oh, you have to go to 422 HQ or 4444 to get proper quality out. You don't. Now, if you're doing this for HBO, if you're doing this for Netflix, I don't know. There might be some different requirements there. There might be some different quality things that you need to consider. I don't know how they get from this to HDR and those shows. That's a whole different discussion that I don't even know about. So there it might be required, but we're talking YouTube here. And for the YouTube, going to ProRes 422 is perfectly fine. Honestly, going to 422 LT is fine, but we just leave it at 422. And that is going to give you the quality that you need. So you don't need to go 4444, which would give you ridiculously huge files and big render files and so on. You don't need it. Don't worry about it. 422, you're good to go. Okay. All right. So we leave that at the default 422. Then here is the color space that we need to set. Now, if you were doing an SDR project and you opened it up, it would say standard Rec 709, and this option, this menu wouldn't even be clickable. You like try to click it and it wouldn't do anything. But now that we have a wide gamut library, we have wide gamut options. So you got your Rec 2020, Rec 2020 PQ, and Rec 2020 HLG. As I said, we don't want to do HLG, we want PQ. So it even tells you right here, wide gamut HDR, that's what we're doing, Rec 2020 PQ. If you're doing 4K, technically, this is kind of a side note here, but technically the 4K spec is Rec 2020. So you should be grading your 4K in that instead of Rec 709, but that's beside the point. It's just a little trivia bit. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, but we are doing HDR, so wide gamut HDR, Rec 2020 PQ. Audio, you can set audio wherever you need to. It's just leave it at the default. So that's that. And again, this would all be set automatically, but I just wanted to show you how to do it manually. So that's there. I'm going to take this clip, add it to the project. It is still in log. Okay, so now we need to fix this. This can be done by selecting the clip here on the browser. It can be done by selecting the clip, it can be done by selecting the clip in the timeline. It can be done by selecting the clip in the browser. And if you have multiple clips, you can do this to all of them at once. So this is not a tedious process. You just select everything, and then you go to the inspector, and you're looking for a command called, there's color space override. Now this is, I know it's in one of these by default, and I can't remember where it is. It's in one of these by default. I have built my own custom, it's not in that one. I have built my own custom metadata view. So to have the ones that I need. So you go to edit metadata view, you go down here and you create a new one. I've created this one here called Photo Joseph, there it is. And then you activate whatever you want in there. The thing that we are looking for is color space override. So there's the one right there. So you enable that, and then that shows up in your list. Just a little tip. I mean, doing these custom metadata views is pretty awesome because then you can have exactly what you want to look at any time. Like I like looking at my file name, my reel, scene, and take. I don't know why that says 138. It was not take 138. And so on, camera angle and so on. So this is stuff that I use all the time. But anyway, here's my color space override. It is currently set to off. This is what will take that file and say to the computer, oh no, this was meant to be HDR. Well, this Rec 2020, the right term. Or this was meant to be Rec 709 for SDR. Some recorders will actually put this flag into them. In fact, little trivia bit, the Blackmagic HyperDeck HyperDeck Mini, HyperDeck Studio Mini, HyperDeck Mini, the HyperDecks, the little recorders, the little mini ones. In some software update a while ago, or firmware update, I guess, they accidentally enabled Rec 2020 embedded in the files. And so every file that you opened up had a Rec 2020 spec to it automatically, and you had to use the color space override to set it back to Rec 709 if you didn't want it in 2020. They have fixed that in one of the updates, and this is, we're talking probably a year ago now, but they have fixed that now. But anyway, your recorder could actually embed the flag in there, and that's all this is. This is just a flag. That's it. So when I go in here now and I switch this, it is going to look marvelous. Well, it's going to look marvelous for me. At this point, as soon as I click that button, it's probably going to look really, really bad on your end. Sorry. It actually is possible to do live streams in HDR. I really need to set that up. I didn't even think about doing that before. Anyway, I've never done it, but apparently you can. Anyway, it's going to look like poop on your screen. It looks marvelous on mine. Sorry. So I set that to Rec 2020 PQ, and suddenly everything is in glorious HDR. And now I'm going to open up my my scopes here. I'm going to hide this other stuff because I'm on a tiny screen. And here we're seeing the brightness range, where you'd usually see 0 to 100 nits. We're now seeing 0 to 10,000 nits. So let's talk about this nit value for a moment here. We see it's a logarithmic curve. You see 0 to 10 takes up, let's call that a quarter of the screen. 10 to 400, let's call it a third. 0 to 10 takes about a third. 10 to 400 takes about a third. 400 to 10,000 takes about a third. So that gives you an idea of the difference between 0 and 100, which would be right about, where's 100? Right about there. 0 and 100 right there, to 100 to 400, to a 400 to 1,000. Most of the data is in this lower range. And so part of what this is telling us is that even though the HDR spec goes all the way up to 10,000 nits, the difference between 1,000 nits and 10,000 nits isn't massive, and which is good that most of it's happening under 1,000 nits, because that's the color space, or that's the range that we're working in today. Even though, so this is really important, even though the HDR spec goes up to 10,000 nits, we don't deliver to 10,000. We deliver to 1,000. Now, there might be special cases. You're doing some specific thing and you have a requirement to go higher nit. That's fine. But 1,000 nits is our current target. In 2021, this is what we're going for, is 1,000 nits. And 1,000 nits is really freaking bright, really bright. You do not want to push all your image up to 1,000 nits or your audience's eyes will bleed. So don't push it. It's one of those things where just because you can doesn't mean that you should. So you don't want to push everything up to 1,000 nits or your content will be unwatchable. So for example, here on this image, I've got a couple of bright white boxes sitting here on the desk, and the lights are hitting them. And if we look over here, we can see that those are getting pretty close to that 1,000 nit range. There is absolutely no reason in the world for that to be at 1,000 nits, just a white piece of paper. Now, if this was some neon sign, right? Now, that's the kind of thing you're like, yeah, let's take that up to 1,000 nits because it's going to be this really cool, bright, saturated color against this, the rainy, dark, rainy street background kind of a thing. Your classic neo-noir, whatever, HDR looking awesome image. That's where you push it up to 1,000. If you take your skin tones up to 1,000, it's going to be like ghosts walking around on screen. So people ask a lot, what is the target range? Like if you're shooting SDR, then it's pretty common to say, oh, skin tones belong around 70, 73 IRE. In HDR, HDR is very much the wild, wild west. There are not really standards of, oh, skin tone should be here. A lot of it is about just how it looks and feels, and keeping in mind that you will literally cause physical pain to your audience if you crank up the brightness too high for no reason. You want to use your really bright selectively. So it's just something to consider when you're grading for HDR. I generally keep my maximum range around 400 nits and then use anything above that for some specialty things that I really want to blast out. If you're grading for 400 nits as kind of a general rule, then your content is going to look fantastic. It's going to be watchable. Your audience's eyes aren't going to hurt. And then you use those really high peaks for occasional stuff. Lee, you do this stuff all the time. I'd love to hear if you have some different opinions on this. By all means, share it in the comments. It'd be great to hear your thoughts on this as well. One of these days, Lee, we got to get this working. We can do a thing together. Okay. All right. So there's just a little bit of an education about that. So we have, and now at this point, so let's go back to the screen. Now at this point, we can grade this just like any normal footage, right? So here's my my grading tools, I can go in here and I can change the highlights and get them brighter or darker. I can take my shadows down, and we look at the scopes, and you got to look at the scopes, and you can see where you're at. Now your tone mapping option, so I don't have it on right here because I've got the XDR display, but if you are on anything less than 1000 nit display, you would definitely want to have this turned on. And what that would do is ramp that down into a more livable range for your display, and things would look not true HDR, but at least it wouldn't be clipped out and look terrible. So that is the option that you want. And I think this will get turned on by default. I'm not sure if it's by default if your system isn't 1000 nits or if it's just by default always, and I've already turned it off. I don't really remember, but that's the option you want to look for. So that's from your view menu, show HDR as tone mapped. So like this right now is a reasonable HDR grade. I probably bring my midtones a little bit. I like to bring my shadows really nice and dark. And we're good to go. Actually, that highlight's a little bit too strong on there, so I might pull that back a little bit. Yeah, so that's basically where you're going. Okay, so this isn't a lesson on how to grade for HDR, it's how to produce the HDR. So there's your basics on this. Now we are going to talk about encoding. That is going to be the next step, and we'll talk about exporting from Final Cut as part of that. But first, let's just see if there's any. Oh, there aren't any other comments. I hope I'm still live and out there because the comments are suddenly gone. Somebody say hi. Tell me that I'm still on the air. And let's just continue on. I am always concerned when my comments suddenly go away. I'm just going to check my feed here real quick and make sure that we are truly still on the air as we should be. Where's my live window? Okay, we're good. All right, it says we're good. Everybody fell asleep in the comments. Okay. Or this needs to be refreshed. Ooh, oh yeah, look at that. Tons of comments. My YouTube thing just stopped refreshing. Okay. Let's see here. Where are we? Oh no, I guess that was the last one. Okay, Richard says hi. Okay, we're good. Whew. Things get quiet, I get nervous. What are you gonna do? All right. Let's move on then, since there's no other comments. We're here. iPhone Dos says we're here. Excellent. That is all I needed. Just confirmation. I just wanted confirmation. Okay, let's go onward to the next step, which is, like I said, it's encoding. So encoding, we're going to be using Compressor. We do have to get a file out of Final Cut first. So let's talk about this. So the first thing is to render out that ProRes 422 file from Final Cut Pro. Technically, you can, from Final Cut, say send to Compressor, and that will produce the file just as we're going to go through. It'll produce the same type of file. However, and I don't know why, I don't know if this has got to be a bug because this was introduced not that long ago, but I have no idea whose bug this is. But anyway, if you do the send to Compressor, when you have your final HEVC file, we're going to talk about all that. When you have your final HEVC file, and then you do the final addition of the HDR to SDR LUT, then you lose audio. Like your audio turns into white noise static. I don't know why. And this is a new problem, but this is a problem. So to avoid that, do this. Export a ProRes file first, and then we're going to drop that into Compressor. Honestly, I think it's actually faster this way anyway. You just have to have an interim step, but anyway. So we're going to output a ProRes 422 file, drop that into Compressor. Once it's in Compressor, we need to make a custom HEVC preset, a custom QuickTime preset. I don't know why this is not already built in. You would think that Apple would have included this because this was a big deal feature add in Big Sur, but you still got to make your own preset. I don't know why. Anyway, so we're going to do all this. You're going to see this, but here's the settings that you need. You create a QuickTime preset. You change the codec to HEVC. You set the encoder type to faster, and this is the new capability. Faster is a lot, like ridiculously faster than the standard. It's kind of faster standard quality, and then there's slow higher quality. Good luck telling the difference. And you need to set it to 10-bit color, and I set the audio to pass through because that just then doesn't reprocess the audio. So the audio that's coming out of Final Cut is fine for YouTube, so that's just how I set it. So that's it. Once you create that preset, it takes a few seconds. You use that preset over and over again. Now here's a little tip for you. You can actually use that same HEVC encode preset for your SDR content as well, and you will get 10-bit SDR content. So for all of you YouTubers out there who are tired of looking at chunky gradations on your background because you've got this beautiful seamless, and you put a light on it, you got this lovely gradient that looks so good in your NLE, and then it looks like poop on YouTube, it's because it's converted to 8-bit. Use this preset and you'll get a 10-bit file to upload to YouTube. Haha, cool. All right, so let's take a look at how this whole thing works. All righty. Let's see. We are going to go next to, we're not going to look at this yet. We're coming back to that later. We're going to Compressor. Actually, we're going to start in Final Cut. Let's go back to Final Cut and export this file. So once you're done with your edit, obviously you're going to edit your file. You go to, so don't do the send to Compressor. Don't do that. We go share master file, and the settings will be as their default just fine. Apple Pro is 422. That's all we need. That's perfectly fine. You can actually set it to automatically open in Compressor when it's done rendering, which just saves a step. So that's kind of cool. It'll send it to Compressor, but you want to do this, export the 422. Okay. I've already got one of these sitting on my desktop. So I'm going to switch over to Compressor, and I'm going to grab the file that is, let me hide this so I can get to my desktop, hide. And I got all kinds of stuff here. Hide and hide. Where's my stuff? Here we go. Hide. Hide. There it is. There's the, good grief. Hide. That's the file I want. I'm going to grab that quick, drag it over. Okay. This is a final output. Oh no, I lied. This is this same file. That's not the one I want to do. Let's do, this is the one that I want. Okay. What have I done here? Close. Reveal. It's an alias. Close that. There it is. There's the final project. Okay. So this is for that actual video from that DJI 3D focus video. This was the final video output from Final Cut as a HDR, you know, the 2020 PQ. That's the file ready to go. That is the ProRes file. So now I need to make an custom HEVC encode preset. So here's how you do it. Go new settings. We're going to set this to QuickTime Movie. We're just going to call this HEVC demo because I already have an HEVC. And then you go, so you've got it selected over here on the left. And by the way, if you don't see these columns on the left, use this little window up at the top will hide and reveal that. So there's my HEVC demo that I just made. I go to the right-hand side and click on video. Again, if you don't see it, click this thing up in the top right to reveal it. And these are the settings that I have. So frame size, we want to leave it at automatic. That way, whatever you give it is what is going to show up in, is what is going to be exported. You can scale it if you wanted to. Like if you wanted to render down a 1080p version, you could do that. But we're going to leave it at automatic. So whatever you give it is what comes back out. Frame rate, we definitely don't want to change that. Just let it spit out what it takes in. Field order, we leave it alone. Color space, here's the first one we need to change. So we're going to set this to Rec 2020 PQ because that is what we are outputting for the YouTubes. Great, so that's set. That's our Rec 2020 PQ. Okay, raw to log, we're going to leave it automatic. Camera LUT, we're going to leave it leave all this. Then we get down to the codec. The codec, we don't want a ProRes file. We want an HEVC file. That's the file that we want output, HEVC. Encoder type, we want faster. If you choose slower, your system will take about a week to encode. Set faster, and it will be much faster. And I'm exaggerating about the week to encode thing, but, oops, let's get the right screen up here. There we go. I'm exaggerating about the week to encode, but it takes a long time. If you leave it at that default version, you go to faster and okay, I'm on a Mac Pro, but it encodes faster than real time, even for 4K. It's fast. So, and this requires Big Sur. So if you haven't upgraded to Big Sur, it's a really good reason to, but that's what you got to do. Okay. Let's go back to this. And then your profile, you got to set it to 10-bit color. Super, super important to set that to 10-bit color. So very, very important. I guess, you know, look at that. The color space defaulted back to automatic, which is fine because I'm sending it PQ. So there you go. So leave that alone. Oh, yeah, right. I did mean to leave that in automatic. I did not mean to set that to PQ because then you can use it for SDR as well. Okay, so I lied to you. Leave the color space as automatic. Set the codec to HEVC, the encoder type to faster, profile to 10-bit, and you are good to go. And then audio, like I said, I enable video pass-through just so that the audio comes right through. I'm sorry, not that. Audio, enable audio pass-through so the audio goes right through. That's funny. I realized in the last demo that I did, I actually enabled that. Oops, silly me. Anyway, so then you enable audio pass-through. Okay, so there's your video settings and your audio is pass-through. Okay, makes sense. It's all in the notes. If, you know, if any of this is sounding stupid, it's 10 o'clock at night here. I've been up all day. PhotoJoseph.com/HDR. It's all there as well. Anyway, so that's that. Now I've got that. Now I've got my demo thing. I drag it on there. And when I encode it, that's what I'm going to get out of it. I'm going to get out that HEVC file. I'm not going to encode this right now, but this is what we would get out of it. And it would be fantastic. So at that point, you now have a file that you can upload to YouTube. But wait, there's more. Next, we got to talk about the HDR to SDR LUT. Before we do that, let me jump back down to the comments and let's just see if there's anything else going on over here. All right, everybody confirming that they're actually here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Still on the air, superb. Everybody's listening and watching intently. That's the idea. Oh, and Lee had to bail out. So Lee, I did actually ask you a couple questions, or I said, hey, if you want to chime in. So by all means, feel free once this is up later, and you get a chance to rewatch it, to add your comments in. Anybody watching this after the fact, look for comments from Lee, because Lee's really smart, and I'm sure will have some things to talk about. Okay, that's the last one on there. Let's move on to the next stage, which is going to be the HDR to SDR LUT. Okay, we're going to create an HDR to SDR conversion LUT in DaVinci Resolve. First, let me just talk about what this is. So your video that is in HDR that might be viewed on SDR screens needs to be converted so that it looks good on those SDR screens. Okay, LUT stands for lookup table. In case you don't know what that is, it just basically takes, it says if the color's here, make it here. The color's here, make it here. That's what a LUT does. It's just a table. So the first question to answer is why? Why do we have to do this? So technically, you know, if you take your HDR file, at this point, we've just created this HEVC file, and we're going to upload this to YouTube. You don't actually have to create a custom LUT. But if you don't, then YouTube is going to apply its own generic LUT to your file. And its generic LUT is a one size fits all, which means it really doesn't, and it is not going to look its best in SDR. So what you want to do is create your own custom file, and you want to do this for every video that you create. I mean, if you're always shooting the exact same environment in YouTube, wearing the same color shirt, and you know you never get a tan, then you could just create one LUT and use it all the time. But odds are you're going to want to create a custom one every single time. It's actually not that hard. I probably spend, I'd call it 10 to 15 minutes doing one of these every time. So it's not a huge ask, but it is so worth it. Before we get into that, I realized I forgot to talk about something about creating the HEVC file. So in the last step, I showed you how to take that ProRes file, convert it to HEVC. That's going to give you a much smaller file to upload. You could actually upload the ProRes file, and you will read things on the interwebs that tell you that that is what you should do. You should upload the ProRes file. I have done extensive testing both various flavors of ProRes, using the HEVC encode, the fast and the slow encode, uploading files to YouTube, and I cannot tell the difference. I have a professional colorist who's an HDR colorist that I've done a bunch of work with. I've hired him to do a bunch of training with me and to kind of educate me on the things that anyway, he as well watched all my tests. He agrees. Can't tell the difference. So if you're going for YouTube, you don't need to upload the ProRes. Now you can, right? If you just like to work that way, you can. If you've got massive bandwidth, then, you know, cool, go right ahead. I think there's kind of a balance of if you have a older, slower system and it takes a really long time to do the HEVC encode, but you have a really fast internet, then maybe you go, well, it's not worth doing the encode. It's actually faster for me to just upload the ProRes, but odds are it's going to be faster to create the HEVC and upload that. Now, once you upload HDR to YouTube, and I'm going to say this now because I'm sure I'll forget later. You know how when you upload 1080p, it's like ready instantly. You upload 4K and sometimes you got to wait a while. When you upload HDR, sometimes you got to wait till tomorrow. It sucks. But sometimes YouTube takes its sweet time to get that file ready for you in HDR. So if you are uploading to meet some embargo, you may not have full HDR ready. Now, it'll be just like it always is on YouTube. You know, first you get the 1080p, then you get the 4K. HDR comes last. And like I said, it has been like next day before. I'm sure if you're MKBHD, you know, it happens virtually instantly, but for the rest of us, not so much. So something to think about. If you're going to upload HDR, you may have to wait a little bit longer before it's ready. Okay, so that's the difference between 422 and ProRes and doing an HEVC and why you would do that. So now let's get back to this. Why are you creating the HDR to SDR LUT? As I explained, if you don't, YouTube will apply one for you, and it is going to look okay, but not great. So how do we do this? It sounds really tedious. I'm going to show you a whole lot of steps. Part of the reason I'm showing you all these steps is because I'm not a DaVinci user, a Resolve user, so I can't assume anything. Like I might show you stuff. If you're a Resolve editor, you're like, duh, everybody knows that. Okay, cool. I'm not a Resolve editor, so I'm showing you everything because if you don't do these, it's not going to work. So that's kind of how that works. First thing up is various project settings. For some reason, many of the project settings are they're not sticky. So every time I launch it, I kind of have to redo things. Now, the color space and transform color space are all by default, they're normal, that they're correct, but it is important that they're this way. So it's something worth checking. Your DaVinci Your color science has to be DaVinci YRGB. The timeline color space has to be Rec 709, Gamma 2.4. Why Rec 709? I thought we were doing HDR. Remember, we're not. We're outputting SDR at this point. So that's why we're setting this to an SDR color space. Next, if you are doing external monitoring, so you've got, an external display, you're going through an interface card to preview it, which again, highly recommended for doing your HDR to SDR conversion. You've got your monitor that you can set to SDR. You can see what it looks like there. Very highly recommended to do this. It always, for me at least, Resolve always forgets these settings. I have to set them every single time I launch them. And you have to quit Final Cut first, because Final Cut will be holding onto that graphics card and will not let go of it until it's quit. And then you'll have to relaunch Resolve. So just quit Final Cut. I'm going to do that right now so I don't forget. Because if I forget, I will get all kinds of errors when I launch Resolve. And yeah, you're going to have to set those each time. If you're not using an external monitor, don't worry about it. And then, open your video scopes. You definitely want to work with your video scopes in Resolve. You'll see that in a bit here. You're also going to see that working on a 1080p screen for this broadcast is very hard in Resolve, but anyway, you want that. Okay, then you add your footage. You drag your footage in, just like in Final Cut, where once you add it to the timeline, it says, ooh, these settings don't match. Do you want to make it match? Actually, it doesn't even ask anymore, does it? It just does it. It just makes it match. Here it's going to ask you, do you want it to make it match? Yes, you want your project to have the same frame size and frame rate. So that's an easy one. You drag your clip to the timeline and you go to the color page. We're going to see all this. You add a serial node. This is where things start to get complicated. You add a serial node. On that second serial node that you've added, you add the Resolve Effects Color Transform. It is a color space transform, and you set your input and your output. So at this point, what you're doing is you are telling Resolve, here's what I'm giving you, and here's what I want you to give me. I'm giving you Rec 2020, ST2084 1000 nit. I want you to give me Rec 709 at a gamma of 2.4. So that's super, super important to set that. That is what makes this whole thing work. So once you set that, then you get to do the fun part, and that's color grading. So you're going to grade your image for SDR. You're going to have an HDR image on screen, and you are going to massage it to make it look good in SDR. So here's what you can do when it comes to grading this. You can do your primaries, your curves and your primaries. Those are what you can edit. So you can do your YRGB curves, you can do lift, gamma, and gain. Basically, most primaries are okay, except highlights and shadows. For whatever reason, that doesn't work. So you don't do highlights and shadows, and you can't do any secondaries. So no power windows or anything like that. Keep in mind, and this is an important part of why secondaries are not part of this process, you are creating a LUT that is going to work, has to work, for your entire file, for your entire project. So if for YouTube videos, this is easy, right? Because most of our YouTube videos are it's you on camera in a similar environment throughout the whole thing. Maybe you do some B-roll outside or something, or you're Farouk and you do like all this insane B-roll. But for the most part, your environment's the same throughout the video. If you're shooting a feature film, this is very different. You've got your dark nighttime scenes, you've got your middle of the desert scenes. Everything's very different. If you were editing a feature film and putting that on YouTube, you still would have to make a single LUT that would convert the whole thing. If you're going that far, then you should, if you really want to do a shot-by-shot HDR to SDR conversion, then upload two files. Upload an HDR version and an SDR version. Just telling you that right now. But for the kind of thing that we're doing here, you do one LUT that's going to convert everything. And so what this means is when you are doing your LUT, when you're building it, designing it, you need to keep scrubbing through your file to make sure that what you've done looks good throughout all of your scenes. So we'll see all this in person. But that's why you can't do secondaries, and secondaries don't get translated into a LUT. Anyway. And then once you've done that, you generate a 33-point LUT and you save that file, and we're going to later embed that into the HDR file. Now, here's a little tip for you. The first time you ever do this, go in Resolve and take the saturation all the way down to the bottom so that you have a black and white image, and generate a 3D LUT, generate that 33-point LUT that is a black and white conversion. And then go through the next steps, which we're going to come to as the final part of this. Go through all those next steps and upload it to YouTube. We're talking about a test file here. Upload it to YouTube, and then look at your video on an HDR display, and you should see it in glorious HDR color, and look at it on an SDR display. If you did your work properly, the SDR version will be black and white. This is how you can know instantly that it worked. You're not looking at the YouTube LUT, you're looking at your LUT. So this is just a little trick to test it to ensure that your process is right. If you see it in color on an SDR display, then you mess something up. Go back, follow the steps again, figure out where you broke it. But do a black and white one, makes it really easy to verify that you've done it properly. And then once you know how to do it, you go back and you do it properly in color. So that is all of that. Now let's do a demo. Oh, man, this is a lot, isn't it? Okay. Excuse me. Time to get into Resolve. All right, let's look at the screen. Let's launch the Resolve. It's funny, when I did this demo earlier today, Resolve launched and it wanted me to enter my, it's launching. It wanted me to enter my serial number, or whatever you call it. It's like, oh, you've never used this before. What are you talking about? What a terrible thing to do in the middle of a demo. Anyway, all right, here comes Resolve. Oh, by the way, I'm using Resolve Studio. You can do this in the free version of Resolve. Super important. I forgot to say this in my earlier demo today. You do not have to have the paid version of Resolve to do this. This 100% works in the free version of Resolve. As far as I know, the only difference between the free and the paid one is what you can output. Like, you can't output anything bigger than 4K or Ultra HD from the standard version. So if you're doing like 8K or whatever, you have to go to the studio version. But we're not outputting a video file. All we're outputting is a LUT. So go for it, man. Even if you're doing 8K, you can still just do your LUT in here and you're good to go. So there you go. All right. So we're in Resolve now. I'm going to hide this out of the way here. We're in Resolve now. I'm going to create a new project and we'll just call this demo 2 because I'm creative that way. And it pops up Resolve. Now here, we're going to look at the settings that I talked about. I'm actually going to, excuse me for a moment here while I pull up my slides. I need to see, I do this all the time, but I still always go back to my, to my notes to make sure that I got everything set up right. Okay, there we go. All right, back to Resolve. So first thing we want to do is check our settings. So there's this gear menu in the bottom right corner that we need to check. The timeline resolution, don't worry about that. Will get set automatically when we drag our first clip in. If you're doing video monitoring, you want to make sure that your video format is set to whatever you're doing, or it's not going to output on your monitor. So like if you're doing a Ultra HD 2997, and then if you're using an external device, a hardware device, for some reason, this stupid thing always defaults to dual link SDI. You got to set it back to single link unless you actually have a dual link interface, which if you do, then you are not watching this video. You need to set that. Like every time I got to set that. It's super, super annoying. And then color management, you want to make sure your color science is set to DaVinci RGB and your timeline color space to Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. Again, this is by default. It's going to be that way, but that has to be set right. And save that. And then under your preferences, if you are using an external interface, you're going to have to go to the video and audio I/O page and choose the interface if you have multiple. So you can see I have 3 different interfaces connected here. You need to set it to the proper one. So these settings, you just need to make sure are correct. Okay, so there's our thing. Let's see, go back to the Finder, and this is my ProRes master. Okay, so for this part of the process, I'm going to use the ProRes file. So I'm using that master file. So another reason to have that master file. Drag this into DaVinci Resolve. It says change the project frame rate, just like I said it would. We say change, yes. Drag this down into the timeline. There's the project, and then we go to the color page. Now that we're in the color page, we do the fun part. So here we've got our nodes. If you've never looked at Resolve before, it's daunting. I barely understand this. I actually really want to learn this stuff deep because Resolve is a phenomenal color grading tool. Final Cut does pretty darn good. I mean, I really enjoy it, but man, there's so much you can do in here. One day. Anyway, here's what we do. So it starts off like this with this one node. We right click on this and choose add node in serial. So we add a serial node. It's just basically adding a node after that. What you're looking at, just to kind of understand this, is you're taking the data, your image, passing it through this node, then through this node, and then out again. You can do all kinds of crazy things with nodes, but this is all we're doing. So we have our second node in here. We open up the effects. We scroll down to where it says Resolve FX Color, and you find Color Space Transform. Add Color Space Transform to the second node. And then here you need to set all these properly. Your input color space and gamma and your output color space and gamma. This is the things that you got to set right. So input color space, and this is all in the list for you, is going to be a Rec 2020. Input gamma is, and this is easy to get wrong, so make sure that you write this down somewhere. The one that we want is, like you might think, oh, Rec 2100, there's the one that I want. Nope, the one that you want is, and it's actually super confusing because it says, where did it go? Rec 2020, where did it go? I just had it. No, it says Rec 2100 ST2084. That's like half of what you need. It seems like it might be the right one, but it's not. It's not. So you keep going down. This is what you want. ST2084 1000 nit. because we graded to a 1000 nit master, SD2084, 1000 nit, that's what you want. So that's the input. So now this image just shifted because now it looks more correct because I'm told it what I'm feeding it. Then there's your output. And this is where we set this to Rec 709. And then we set the output gamma to gamma 2.4. So those are the settings. Again, this is all on that web page, so don't worry about writing it down, but that's what you need to set. Now we get to grab this guy and we start playing with the color. So with this guy selected, we can do whatever we need to do to make it look good. Let me switch over to the histogram view. Where'd my histogram view? Oh, right. I want to do this custom. Here we go. We start here and we are going to do basic curves editing to start, and then we'll do some color work. Now we do absolutely want to have our video scopes up. So it's already on. It's on my other screen, but anyway, it's right there. So workspace, video scopes on, and I've got them on my other screen. Let me drag these over. Where'd it go? Drag this over. Here it comes. There's your scopes. I can't make this any smaller, which makes doing it on this little screen very challenging. But we're going to look primarily at the parade. And you know, I never even tried. Could I? Oh, that works. Make it smaller. We're looking at the parade in here. It's 10-bit, so we go up to 1024. This is SDR, so we just want to make sure, like any other SDR thing, that we are not clipping. We're not clipping blacks unless you want to crush your blacks. We're not clipping our highlights for sure. In fact, let me make this even smaller. Can I do this? I should have figured this one out for my demo earlier this morning. Oh yeah, it makes it much easier. This, you do want to look at the other ones, but this is your primary thing. Again, I'm not here to educate you on how to color grade in Resolve, just how to get this set up. So once that's in here, we need to adjust the curves. Now here's a little tricky thing about the curves in here. Look at your histogram. Look at my highlight. My brightest point is not all the way to the right. And anybody who knows how to read a histogram goes, well, that should be all the way to the right. If I look at the output, then we're seeing it the way you would expect to see it. But I look at here and it's not. And so you might think, okay, well, I'll just take this and I'm going to bring that over so it's up to that point there. But look at what happened to the waveform here, to the parade. We just blew everything out. You can see that in the image. You're now looking at a Rec 709 image. So what you see should look right here. So that is not how you do that. What you need to do instead, if you want to adjust your highlights, which you probably will, is start by adding a locking point just after your highlight peak or somewhere after your highlight peak, and then add another point just below it to pull your highlights down. If you want to pull your highlights down, or if you want to raise them up, although that could get ugly very quickly. If you want to raise them up, you're probably going to bring this up a little bit there. I always need to bring them down because you're coming in from this crazy bright HDR thing. So I almost always need to pull these down a little bit. Then if you want to change your black point, don't grab this point and move that. Leave that anchor there. And then you might want to pull your shadows down. What I tend to generally do with most of my videos is my base curves look something like this. And it may not work for this particular video, but that's kind of generally where I go. But this is the key thing. You need to lock it right after the edge of the histogram here, not move this guy right there, or you're totally going to mess everything up. Now remember, at this point, we are looking at, and this is pretty bad. Let me actually get a halfway decent grade on here to start with. Pull these down. I kind of really messed this thing up there. Lift up the shadows a little bit. Oh yeah, there we go. That's a little bit better. Pull up those shadows a touch. Those mids are looking pretty good there. There we go. We're getting somewhere. It's looking halfway decent. Nope, definitely don't want to bring this up. Yeah, all right. We're going to call that close enough. And pull my highlights down. There we go. Close enough. Again, I'm not here to teach you how to do that. Play with it. Make it look good. This is just your curves, but what we can also do is play with the colors. And this is something that you will probably almost definitely want to do to make your custom LUT look good. So when you are converting from HDR to SDR, you may lose certain colors, like your blues, your reds might not look as good in the base conversion as they did before. Obviously, they're never going to get back to HDR space, but you can make them look a lot better. So what I would do is, let's say, for example, my blue shirt, I want to make it a little bit more saturated. So I go to here and I go hue versus saturation. We can see the blue right here, but I'll grab the eyedropper here and just click on my blue shirt. It adds a couple anchor points, and let's bring up the saturation of my blue shirt. And then let's make it a little bit darker as well. It's probably too much. Let's make it a little bit darker. I'll go here, hue versus luminance, and I'll do the same thing. Eyedropper, click on the blue, and let's make that a little bit darker in there. So now I've got this kind of darker blue shirt that I'm wearing. You know, if you want to adjust your skin tones, you can do that. There's all the things that you can do, but just remember you're going to have to scrub through and make sure that what you've just done looks good everywhere. That's the super critical part of this. Make sure it looks good absolutely everywhere. See, like some genius here. I went and changed shirts halfway through this because it was shot over multiple days. So making that one, frankly, a little bit more of a challenge, but it is what it is. You got to make it look good. So once you are happy with it, you can do lift gamma gain, as I said, you can do saturation controls. You can use a lot of these different tools in here. You can use all these in here. Once you're done, you right click on the little video thumbnail, whatever this is called here. You go to generate LUT, and you want to create a 33-point cube LUT, and you just choose that, and you stick that wherever you want, put it on the desktop, call it demo, and this is going to create a .cube LUT file, which is what we're going to need for the absolute final step in this before we upload. So that is what it takes to create that custom LUT. You got to set up Resolve properly, you set up your secondary node, you set your input and output, and then you grade it until it looks good. There's not a whole lot you have to do, so you can learn it fairly quickly, but this is what you got to do. And like I said, I usually spend 10, 15 minutes doing this for each one of my videos. It's not a huge deal, but you know, it needs to be done. Okay, there's one more step left. So of course, before we do that, let's jump back over to the comments here and see what people are saying. Keith says, can you use the slower than molasses in January option if you can't upgrade to Big Sur, or do you not even get HEVC? You do get HEVC. You absolutely have HEVC in Compressor dating back quite a while. It's just that it is painfully slow. So honestly, before, I've been doing this for a while, right? Before this fast option came in with Big Sur, it was kind of a draw whether it was faster for me to upload a massive 4K 10-minute long ProRes file versus encoding that to HEVC and then uploading the much smaller file. That's how long it took. So it will totally work. So it just depends on your system and what you've got available. So yeah, there you go. Thank you. Al says hi. Well, hi, Al. Okay, that's the only question. Excellent. All right, now let's get into the final step in here. This final step, excuse me, is without a doubt the most ridiculous step. This is embedding the LUT, which requires the command line. You know, YouTube, if you're watching, because I know you guys watch all my videos, if you just give us the option to upload the LUT, that would make this a whole lot easier. But no, this is what you have to do. And you'll see that this has been this way for a long time. All right, step number one, you have to download the app. The app is downloaded from a GitHub page. And then the app is run in terminal. Yes. So there's a link to the app. If you go to that photojoseph.com/HDR, there's a link to the GitHub page. I will show you that page. Let me just pull it up on my screen right now so I don't forget. There we go. I will show you the GitHub page. This is where you go to download it. Then you are going to save the command that I have on my webpage. This is the command that you need to do the next steps. You're going to need this code. So copy that, paste it into a text doc on your system, save it forever. You're going to need it. Then you move your downloaded HDR metadata folder, this HDR metadata master app folder that you've just downloaded. You move that into your home folder. I'm sure that you could redo the code to put it wherever you want, but everything is set up so that you just put everything into the root level of the home folder and that's it. Leave it there. It just makes this whole process easier. Doesn't matter that it's sitting there. It just makes everything easier. So do that. Then you move your custom LUT and your HEVC file. So the custom LUT we just created in Resolve and the HEVC file that we encoded out of Compressor. We move both of those into the home folder as well. So everything's at the same level. And then we're going to rename the LUT and the HEVC file to the same names, HDR_2_SDR_LUT, just like you see on your screen there. You're going to name everything that way. You can rename it later back to whatever you want, but this is how the script works, makes it really easy to do. And then you take the code that I've given you, you paste that into terminal, you hit return, and you let it do its thing. And that's it. That's all you got to do. It doesn't take that long to do. It's just kind of ridiculous that this is what we have to do. I have taken the code that is in that page and I use Text Expander on my system. So what I do is I copy the files over into the home folder, just like I put here, and I rename them as I put here. And then I open terminal and I type in HDR LUT, I think is my, like what I type in, and Text Expander goes, and it expands it out to the code that I've pasted in there with you. So if you use Text Expander, that's kind of cool. Makes that easy. Anyway, okay. Let's see a demo of how this process works because it's so much fun. So ridiculous. The GitHub page. Again, link in my webpage, photojoseph.com/HDR. You will see it takes you to the YouTube HDR metadata page. this is where you need to get your code. You click on the green code button and you choose download zip. That is going to download a folder that will unzip that you then move into your home folder. Once you move it into your home folder, let's go to my home folder. Here's what we're going to have. Let's see here. There we go. HDR to SDR LUTs. This, oh, and that's, I lied. HDR metadata master. That's what you're going to get. Now, if you watch some other videos, there is a video, actually, let me kind of back up for a second. There is a really good video that is just very, very fast paced by this colorist named Aaron Hinton. You think I go fast. Aaron's amazing. He's the colorist I've been working with for over a year now. I've hired him a bunch of times to do training with me. He's a great, great colorist, and he's the one who put the video together for this part of the process that I initially followed, and I have modified his steps to make them even easier. When I shared it with him, he's like, why the hell didn't I do that? So, you know, chalk one up for me. But you'll see if you watch his video that he tells you to open this HDR metadata master folder, open up the macOS folder, go to the MKV Merge app, right click on that, show package contents, navigate to the macOS MKV Merge file in here and drag this to terminal. When you do that, let me just do this. Let me open up terminal here. When you do that, what you get is this path to that file. I have built this path into the code that that I provided you. So that's why you don't need to do this step of it, because I've already built that path in, which also means that it's easier to do by dropping in with Text Expander, because it just drops all that code in there and away you go. So that's that part of it. Okay, so you have, back to Photo Joseph, there we go. So you have this HDR metadata master folder sitting in your home folder. Then, oh look, so I've got a note to myself about the white noise problem. Cannot render HEVC from Final Cut Timeline, must go from ProRes. So I've made a reminder to myself because sometimes I forget and I go, why is this here? Anyway, and then here I have an RTF file that has the code that I need. So this top level, you're going to create one that looks like this, the bottom half. Mine, you know, I've just got both in here, but this is all you need, this bottom half. And again, that is what is on the on that web page for you. So just do this, copy that, create a text file, save it into your home folder, and save it just like this with this HDR to SDR LUT.rtf, because you're going to need this text, and this makes it really easy to get that text. Okay, so you're going to put that there. Then you're going to, let me find the files. You're going to take your HEVC file. So let's see here. Here's the file that I already rendered for this particular project out of Compressor. So that is an HDR file. I'm going to copy this into my home folder, which will take just a moment. It's a little 4 gig file. So look, 4 gig, just to show you the difference, 4 gig versus 58 gig file. So there's my ProRes source, 58 gigs. There's the HEVC file, 4 gigs. Huge difference. So there's my video file. As I said, I want to name that the same thing. So I'm just going to copy that name, go up here and rename that video file. So now I've got my movie file there. Now I need the LUT. So where's the LUT? I just created, here it is. I'm going to drag this into the home folder as well. Yes, I want to move that. I'm also going to rename this the same thing. If you just hit return to activate it and then paste, you're going to lose the .cube extension. So you do need that .cube extension on there. So make sure you have that when you're done. So here's what you end up with. You have an HDR to SDR LUT.cube, HDR to SDR LUT.mov, and your HDR to SDR LUT.rtf or .text or whatever that has all of this good info in it. Now we go to terminal, and you can copy and paste. Let's do it the way that you'll do it. I'm going to open this. I'm going to take this code here, and I just realized that I think I pasted this on the code, users photo Joseph. You're going to want to replace that with your user folder name or just the tilde. That works as well. Silly me. I will change that afterwards. My bad. So you take this code and then you paste this into here. So that's one way to do it. So what I've done, let me just close this and create a new terminal window. What I've done, because I use Text Expander, is I type HDR LUT and boom, it just expands out, and there I've got that. So see, that's how I do it. And all this is doing is saying, open this app, so there's the app, that path that I showed you, the MKV Merge. Here's opening the HDR to SDR LUT file. It's creating a new package, if you will. Add this color matrix information, add the LUT, there's the attaching the actual LUT to it. And starting with it's kind of like backwards, create this file, embed all this stuff starting with this file. I don't know, I don't do code. And then you hit return, and it just powers through and it does its thing. It'll take like less than a minute to do. It'll take a moment to think about it, and then it'll start. There we go. It gives you progress. It might get to 100% and then start over, but then it finishes before it gets to 100% again. And the end result is going to be this name right here, HDR to SDR LUT.mkv. That MKV file is your magic file that has both the HDR file and the HDR to SDR LUT embedded into it. So we're going to let this finish up. We'll come back to that in a moment. We'll let that finish up. And then that MKV file is what you upload to YouTube. And that, my friends, is the process. That is everything you need to do. It's almost done. It's pretty fast. It's a pretty fast process. This only takes a minute or so. And it'll tell you at the end. See there, it started over, but it won't go very far. And then it'll just say it's done. I don't know why it does that. I have no idea. Probably some other aspect of it. Boom, done. Muxing took 54 seconds. Look at it, less than a minute. And it's done. And that's it. And now if we look in here, there's that .mkv file. So now you can rename it whatever you want. Just call it whatever you want. And there's the name of your video file that you can upload to the YouTubes. You'll notice too that it is the exact same size. It's still 3.9 gig, right? The only difference it is this file and this file combined into a package called an MKV. And that is what gets put up onto the YouTubes. And then everything works and everything is glorious. And that is all you got to do. All you have to do. It's a lot, but it's fun. It's cool. It's worth it. I think it's worth it. So there you go. photojoseph.com/HDR for all the good info. I will fix that code or fix it yourself. Just put your proper username in there. And that's it. That's what it takes. So, wow, that was a lot. That was a lot. Oops, wrong button. Turn that off and bring that up. There we go. So let's just see what else is happening in the chat. Elisavke, I have no idea. Hello from the London. Hello in the London. Really strange seeing me live at this time. I go live at this time generally every other week, so it's not that strange. It's a little bit late today. It's been, my watch died. I have no idea what time it is. It's late. I know it's late, but we're here. Love the command line. You would, you geek. iPhone. Oh, yeah, we used to do something very similar for 360 files years ago. Yes, the 360. I never got into 360. Output is very cool and need to review the recording for this one. Please do. So there you go. That is the process. So now that you've learned all of that, now that you know everything you need to know, what do you think? Is it worth it? You guys going to start outputting HDR content? It's a lot, but it looks so good. Let me give you some other, excuse me, little tips. So this whole final process about creating the HDR to SDR LUT, embedding it and so on, is so that YouTube delivers, if someone pulls up your video on an SDR screen, it delivers that custom version of the video for them. Regardless of whether you do that or not, it doesn't matter here. YouTube will sometimes get it wrong. There is a combination of like the specific type of computer, specific browser, specific operating system where YouTube will get it wrong, and it will deliver the HDR file to an SDR viewer, and it will look like poop on their screen. I'd say, I mean, it's like way less than 1% of the viewers, I think, that get this problem, but it does happen. So what I have come to do to try and resolve that problem is I will upload as well an SDR version of the video, and I leave it unlisted. But at the very beginning of the HDR video, you know, get little pop-out cards in YouTube, I put a pop-out card that says, looks like poop, and I have a little poop emoji. Click here. And when they click on that, it will take them to the SDR version. So on a video, let's say for every 10,000 views, I might get like 10 people. So whatever percentage that works out to be, that actually see that and click through. And I'm sure some people see the bad video and just leave. You know, I'm sure that happens. I've had comments like, why is your video so blown out? I'm like, you click on the thing. One day this will get fixed, but for now, because it does happen, it's rare, but it does happen, I do upload that SDR video as well. And like I said, I just leave it hidden. I'll also put it in the link in the description, you know, give people a couple of different ways to find it if they need to. And that way they can see the SDR version. So I will take my HDR file and take that SDR LUT and run them through Compressor and just embed that LUT in Compressor and end up with an SDR file output. That SDR file is also useful if you're going to upload it anywhere else, like to Facebook, which doesn't do HDR. So you can upload that SDR file to Facebook if that's your thing. So yeah, that's just a little tip that I do, you know, or you could just say, forget about it. I don't care about those very, very small percentage of viewers, but it's an option, something you can do in there. Okay. Yeah. So Mr. iPhone Doe says, so much valuable information. Why, thank you. I appreciate that. Coming from you, that means a lot. Keith says, I could write a shell script so you drag the .mov and the .lut into terminal authority naming. Cool. Where would you like it emailed, or should I paste it as a command here eventually? Cool. Joseph at photojoseph.com. Send it to me. That's awesome. That's cool. Neat. Haha. Yeah, email it to me and we'll talk about it, and you tell me if you will let me distribute that, because that's pretty awesome. I am working on, now, regular viewers like, you've been saying this for a year now, but it's true. This, what you just saw, is the short version of a much longer, more in-depth, more historical information, more of the why as opposed to just the how, and slower paced video that I've been working on for a long time. Eventually this will get released. It's going to be multiple hours long. It's all of this and then some about outputting for HDR. When that's done, Keith, if your thing does what you expect it to do, then that would be pretty cool. I could include that. That'd be awesome. We'll get there. What about Vimeo? Keith asked, what about Vimeo? So Vimeo will display HDR, but they do not have a provision to have a custom HDR to SDR LUT. I have talked to them about it to verify it's true. They just apply their own LUT to it, which again, it's okay, but it's not ideal. So unfortunately, Vimeo does not have a good workflow for this. Their HDR looks fine. You upload the HDR, it plays back just fine on there, but not SDR. So that's a bummer, but there you go. All right, guys, if you have any other questions, get them in now, because we are definitely hitting the end of my clock. I am exhausted right now. I've been doing this all day. It's been a long day. It is currently 10:30 at night here. I'm just about done, but I just want to make sure I get all your questions answered. So if you got them, get them in there. If you don't, say goodbye and sign off, and let's wrap this thing up. Whew, I think that was fun, right? I hope you guys like it. I hope you guys like it. I hope you guys do it. That's the goal. You guys got to do this thing. Keith says, of course I can share it. Thank you. I worked in a university and believe in publicly available code. You're awesome. Thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, drop it in an email to me. I would love that. Al says, thank you. Check it out. Richard says, thank you as well. You're welcome, guys. I appreciate you watching tonight. Didn't have a whole lot of viewers here today, but it's whenever I do HDR stuff, there's not that many people that watch, but I think it's going to grow. Lee. Oh, Lee. Oh, Lee. No. You can rewind. The rewind works. All right. I'm going to go home and pour myself a whiskey and go to sleep. I think that is a requirement for today. This has been a very, very long day. That was super fun. Thanks, guys, again, for tuning in today. That was awesome. I really appreciate you watching. This, of course, will be available on this channel ad nauseum. You'll be able to watch this at any time. Come back to it. I'm also going to embed this video in that photojoseph.com/HDR page. So it's all in one place. So there you go. All right. Everybody saying good night. Good night to all of you. I love you all. Thanks a bunch. Next live show, which will be next Tuesday, Tito from the Anamorphic on a Budget channel is coming in, and via, virtual, whatever. And we're going to talk anamorphic. So if you want to learn about anamorphic, he's the guy. I asked him to come on the show because I want to learn more about anamorphic. I know very little about it. So he's going to come on and answer questions and talk about the history of anamorphic. And it's going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to that. So that's next Tuesday morning, 10 a.m. Tuesday, 10 a.m. next week. Yeah. Anamorphic live. Check it out. All right. See you later.